Hello, YouTube. Hi, this is Dr. Ronald W. Satz, founder and chair of the International Society of Unified Science and president of TransPower Corporation, a commercial and custom software manufacturing and certified systems engineering company. We do science, engineering, management consulting, and work on the reciprocal system of theory. As you might imagine, I sometimes come across professors who disagree with us. So here's a response to a Washington State University faculty member who took it upon himself to critique the reciprocal system. So I'm going to read his comments and then interject my own. So here's his message. And the question is Dewey D. Larson for real? Of course he's for real. I worked with him from 1965 until his death in 1990. He was far more intelligent than any college professor I ever met. Anyway, this professor says, I'd never heard of Dewey Larson before your query. There are places which seem to indicate that the fellow did really exist, though he's now deceased, and published half a dozen books in the 1950s through 1980s, all of them based on what I will politely call non-standard physical theories. I hadn't previously heard of the International Society of Unified Science, on whose worldwide website his works seem to appear. They don't seem to appear, they do appear. They're available in scripty format, by the way. I can't find anything about either Larson or the Society which is not of their own authorship, except that Amazon.com lists Larson's books as out of print, which at least means that they did exist at one time. Larson's books are still in print. They are also available to be read online for free. Yes, the reciprocal system is non-standard. That's because it is a new and far superior paradigm. Okay, and the professor continues. I wouldn't go so far as to label them a hoax at this point, but what I read on their sites about astronomy is sadly out of date and incompatible with observations now. What I read also leans heavily on vague double talk, with a dearth of quantitative predictions concrete enough to be disproven. There are hand-waving comments, but very few predictive numbers, and a careful selection of comments from old scientific literature to convey an inaccurate impression of large-scale ignorance, confusion, and contention among the mainstream scientific community which they purport to settle. These are known standard tactics for people trying to sell a fringe idea which is either questioned or outright wrong. Yeah, well, Professor, you can keep teaching the bogus Big Bang Theory, curved space, quarks, strings, neutron stars, the rest of the garbage of modern physics. The reciprocal system is completely quantitative, right down to the basic quantities of space and time, which are discrete, by the way, not continuous. And you can check out my blog site, transpower.wordpress.com, which is also the same as reciprocalsystem.guru. I did find a continue with the professor here. I did find a couple of clearly and demonstrably incorrect claims, despite the vagueness of most of their presentation. I limited myself to the work on stars because I know that best. Example 1. In their view of stellar evolution, stars begin as red dwarfs, low surface temperature, low luminosity, and as they grow older, their density, temperature, and luminosity increase, culminating in an explosion. I want to see numerical predictions of the history of the sun, how old it is, how its luminosity has changed with time, how fast it should be changed now, and so on. We know from the fossil record, however, that the surface temperature of the Earth hasn't changed very much over the planet's history, and since this temperature reflects at least partially the energy input from the sun, the solar luminosity can't have changed by very much either, maybe a factor of 2. That sounds like a lot, but the red dwarfs, which are the supposed early stages before the sun, are thousands of times less luminous than the sun is now. This kind of luminosity is incompatible with the geologic record. My response is, the reciprocal system says that stars increase in mass as they move up the main sequence. See the table below. The observational data is in complete accord with the theory. Continuing with the professor. Example 2. The prediction is made that hotter and brighter main sequence stars are denser than the cooler and fainter ones. This is directly contradicted by observations of stars. We can estimate masses and diameter of stars in some binary star systems in which the two stars happen to take turns blocking our view of each other. These are called eclipsing binaries. By taking repeated spectroscopic observations of the stars, we can work out the orbits of the stars around each other. This involves using the Doppler effect. See here among many other places on the web for something about it, to tell how fast the stars are moving. This same physical effect is used by radar guns to measure the speeds of stars, and then using three of Isaac Newton's inventions, calculus and the laws of motion and gravitation, to solve for the orbit. There's a nice description of binary star orbits here. Many of the properties of orbits were discovered by Kepler when analyzing observations of the planets. Newton developed the physics and mathematical tools for understanding why those are. Okay, no disagreement here. The orbit tells us how fast the stars are moving, so using that and timing how long the eclipse lasts tells us how big the stars are, that is, their diameters. The orbit also tells us how much mass there is in the system. The more mass, the more gravity, and the faster things move. Once we have both the mass and the diameter of the stars, then we know the density as quickly as we can do the geometry problem, computing the volume of the sphere when given its diameter. Density is equal to mass divided by volume, of course. Once you've done the measurements, numbers indicate that among main sequence stars, the hottest, most luminous stars have the lowest density, while the cool, low luminosity dwarfs have the highest density. Again, see the table below. The conventional astronomers have the sequence upside down. And the professor goes on, example 3, and some of the stuff, quote, worked out about the structure of the sun and the nature of the sunspots. The implication is clearly made that the oblateness of the sun, that is, how flattened the sun's disk appears to us, should change over the course of the 11-year sunspot cycle, in the sense that it should become more oblate as the cycle progresses and sunspots appear at lower solar latitudes. This, I don't know where he gets that from. This also is directly contradicted by observation that the oblateness of the sun is constant over time within the accuracy of our measurements. And my response is, all that Larson says on this matter is, quote, the origin of these spots is unknown, but no doubt are initiated in some manner by the energy production process. Hence, they may be giving us an indication of the variations in the output of that process that would be expected from periodic changes. See the Universe of Motion, page 62. There are certainly other problems with their work. I picked out 3 items that I spotted quickly and could refute in a short amount of time. No, Professor, you haven't refuted anything. In my view, rather than merely a hoax, this is more likely to be the product of one or more sincere crackpots. There's no shortage of these in the world. It's rare for most astronomy departments to go a month without getting a letter or monograph from one. And it has to be admitted, as one of my favorite editors once observed, that some crackpots have highly methodical cracks in their pots. There's a great editorial in the October 1980 issue of Analog magazine about crackpots if you're interested in seeing other aspects of them. Sincerity of belief is all that separates the crackpot from the fraud, however, and history is full of examples of people adhering to ideas that turn out to be very wrong. Well, excuse me, Professor, but we are real scientists and engineers. Mainstream science has been taken over by the fruits and nuts who have given us the nuclear theory of the atom, quantum mechanics, which is, by the way, one of the most bizarre mythologies ever foisted on the human race, the Big Bang, neutron stars, quarks, black holes, and other assorted irrational nonsense. All of these theories involve singularities, but this contradicts the accepted philosophical principle that there can be no singularities in nature. Now let me be clear. The reciprocal system says that stars slowly progress up the main sequence, not staying pat or going down. So look at the star type here. I have the major types, O, B, A, F, G, K, and M, the color, the approximate surface temperature, and the average mass, with the sun as 1. So you can see that the masses do go up as the star moves up the stellar type from M to O. This professor is currently at Seattle University, although I'm reading this like in 2018, so he might have moved on from now. He seems to change jobs quite often. He seems to be sincere in his belief in the conventional paradigm, though misguided. His list of papers shows that he's mostly concerned with the chemical composition of stars, and there's probably little to find fault there. On the other hand, he doesn't realize he's teaching his students all kinds of irrational, illogical theories, and therefore miseducating them. So, and by the way, as far as IQ, professors, the average IQ of a college professor is only 125. The average IQ of a college student is only 115. There are people on this planet who have vastly higher IQs than the average college professor. And I'm just afraid to say this, but this professor simply does not have sufficient IQ to understand the reciprocal system, which is a shame. So that's it. I'm going to end the screencast here. Please like and comment below if you wish. Thanks for your attention.